Hello, I'm Jon Kirkman. I'm a broadcaster and journalist in the UK. And whilst some of us are still in lockdown, although it's starting to ease across the world now, thankfully, these are some of the things you may have missed. What I'm talking about today is this. This is a box set and it's available via Cherry Red Records. And it's from the Kursaal Flyers and it's called Little Does She Know. Now, the Kursaal Flyers were a band from Southend. And there were quite a few bands from Southend that were very popular in the 70s. Dr. Feelgood, of course, also Eddie and the Hot Rods, and the Kursaal Flyers. Now, to get a really good idea of what the Kursaal Flyers were all about, in 1976, Melvyn Bragg, who had an arts programme on the BBC called Second House, made a documentary about the band, and it's a really, really good documentary, and you can find that on YouTube just by doing Kursaal Flyers documentary. But at the time, their second album, The Great Artiste, was actually on release. But the band actually had an album before that. That's their debut album. It's called Chocks Away. Now, their first two albums were on UK Records, which was the record label owned and founded by Jonathan King. Now, you may remember that 10cc also were on UK Records as well. Their first two albums, I think it was 10cc and Sheet Music, were on UK Records. And they were just about to leave UK Records when Jonathan King became interested in the Kursaal Flyers in late 75. Now, at that point, the Kursaal Flyers, they went pro in 1975, January 1975. And there's a nice interview that's going to be on the SoundCloud page, which the address will be running on the bottom of this video. And you can hear me talking to Will Birch, founder member and drummer with Kursaal Flyers. And Will also writes the sleeve notes for this particular booklet, really in detail. Very, very nice book. I'll show you that in a second. And these days, of course, Will is a journalist and an author. He's written some great books. One all about the pub rock movement, which was called No Sleep Till Canby. He wrote what I think is the definitive Ian Dury biography, and he's more recently done a great biography on Nick Lowe. So certainly a guy to check out book-wise as well as musically. He was in a band called The Records following the Kursaal Flyers. But this album was out at the time of the documentary made for the BBC. Now, I have to say, this album is a big jump from this one. It was a kind of nice homemade-y feel to this album. There's some great songs on there like Pocket Money. But this was a really, really good album, and it got a little bit better in the studio for the second album. Now, these days, of course, bands take years to make albums. Sometimes there's 3-4 years between albums. Not for the Kursaals. That came out, the Great Artiste came out in 1976. This came out in 1976 as well, and the kind of link was Mike Batt, because they actually recorded re-recorded a song with Mike Batt. And that was the in there for Mike Batt. And Will Birch was always a big fan of Mike Batt. As he admits in the interview, he got the Wombles records. A little bit of info about Mike Batt. People think he was just the Wombles and things like that. No, not at all. He had a couple of hit singles himself, solo-wise, in the 70s. But in the late 60s, he was actually a staff producer for United Artists, or Liberty Records as it was then. And so he was very, very firmly entrenched in the music industry. And had a very good reputation for producing as well. So when he hooked up with the Kursaals, they ended up doing this. And they had a hit record, their final and only hit record, really. It's a shame. They should have had more hit records, I think. But little does she know that I know that she knows. Yeah, you know. Great record. And they did Top of the Pops. I have to say, it had everything but the kitchen sink in it. It was almost a Phil Spector wall of sound. It had timpani in it and oboes and there was all sorts of things in that song. It was a great little song. Big problem, not long after this, one of the main men in the band, that guy there, Graham Douglas, he jumped ship. He wanted things to be, I think, a little more rockier. So he left and he joined pretty quickly the Eddie and the Hot Rods, which became the Rods, and he wrote the great song, Do Anything You Want to Do. So there was a nice connection there with the Rods. However, the band carried on. They brought in a guy called Barry Martin. There's Barry there. Great guitarist, who'd previously been a drummer. After the Kursaals, of course, you may remember him in a band called the Hamsters, who did a lot of great Jimi Hendrix-influenced and blues-influenced records. He replaced Graham Douglas in the band, and the band made this. And I think this is an absolutely amazing live album. You really should hear it. I mean, the power of the band at this point was pretty full on. They kind of tightened up a little bit, as it was in keeping with a lot of bands at that time. And it's a really punchy live album. 5 live Kursaals. I think there's a little bit of a nod there to the Yardbirds, because their first album, I think, was 5 live Yardbirds. But this really is a very, very good live album, and you should hear it. It's very, very good. And it even includes Little Does She Know. And whilst the single version was a hugely produced record, the band actually could produce it live, and it's very, very good. Now, here is an album that came out sort of mid to late 80s. A former tour de force is forced to tour. They got back together and made an album with the original bass player there, because Richie wasn't available for this, although Richie did tour with the band. But I have to say, it's a great little album, done very, very quickly and kind of on the cheap, little 8-track studio, with some great little songs on here. And certainly in keeping with what the Kursaals were all about. And it had almost come full circle for them from kind of the very first album, Chocks Away, right to this. There's that kind of similar homemadey feel to it, but it doesn't detract from the music or the songs in any way. So that's their final album. Now, the actual booklet. Now, this was written, of course. There you go. There's the band. This was written by Will Birch, who is a renowned author and journalist these days. And I have to say, I love his books. I mean, a big quick plug for his books. The No Sleep Till Canvey and the Ian Jury and, of course, the Nick Lowe books. They're the biggies. And I have to say, they're absolutely incredible books. You should get them if you see them anywhere. Look them up on your online retailer like Amazon or something like that. You can get this particular box set, however, directly from Cherry Red. Look, here's some fabulous pictures, tour posters and flyers and stickers and things from the very first album, The Great Artiste, the second album. We move forward. There's a kind of a rather nice family tree of the band showing their roots and how they ended up. And again, the notes throughout are absolutely superb. And Will actually takes you right the way through the story of the Kursaal Flyers. And as I said, please do check out that particular documentary on YouTube. Just put in Kursaal Flyers documentary, and it's really good. And it gives you a really good idea of what it was like touring in the UK in 1976. And I know, because I was touring with bands in those days, and it really is spot on. And as well as the music, it's funny because it's very gritty and very realistic, because the actual documentary parts of the band being collected from their homes, and most of them were living at home at the time, and they were on £40 a week, which doesn't sound like a lot, and it probably isn't. But then again, it wasn't a bad wage back in 1976. But if you were married in the Kursaal Flyers, you got slightly more because you had a mortgage and commitments to take care of. But you'll hear all that in the interview. Again, the link is moving along the bottom of this particular presentation. Again, that's what they looked like when they reformed in the 80s. There's a little more wiser, I think, and a little greyer of hair in certain areas. But they were a fabulous band, and you get all the track listings here. You get bonus tracks as well on this box set. It's hugely worthwhile. They were a nice little band, and they were a very important part of what was the pub rock scene back in the day, along with bands like Ducks Deluxe, Dr. Feelgood, Eddie and the Hot Rods, Bees Make Honey, Eggs Over Easy, and like I've said many, many times, probably the link between rock and punk rock. Sadly though, punk rock kind of sunk the pub rock boat, but a lot of the people involved went on to bigger and better things, thankfully, and a lot of them are still around today, still creating, still making music or writing books and things like that. This box set, however, is available from Cherry Red Records. You can order it. The link is at the bottom of this page now. It's full of great music. It's the entire recorded output of the Kursaal Flyers, and certainly well priced and one to add to your collection. My name's Jon Kirkman. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation, and I'll be back with you again, I suppose, very quickly with another presentation with some other things that you may have missed during lockdown. Thanks for watching.